Today's unSeminary resource is brought to you by Aware 3. At Aware 3, their goal is to help your church build connections using mobile technology. They help you extend church beyond Sunday mornings by putting it in the palm of everyone's hand. Learn more about how a custom mobile app can help you improve engagement, communication, and generosity at www.aware3, that's the number 3.com.
Welcome to the unSeminary podcast. Are you looking for practical ministry help to drive your ministry further, faster? Have a sinking feeling that your ministry training didn't prepare you for the real world? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others in pursuit of stuff that we wish they had taught in seminary. Buckle up and let's get started with this week's unSeminary podcast.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to the unSeminary podcast. My name's Rich, the host around these parts. Thanks so much for serving at your church. We know that you've got a really busy week this week, and we're just honored that you would take some time out to listen in. Every week we try to have church leaders that have led in some unique situations to try to help us learn and grow in our situation. And today I'm just honored so much to have Pastor Dany Anderson with us. He's from Emmanuel Church. This church was founded by the founding pastor, Jim, and you'll see why that's important here, Jim Devney in 1977. And Dany Anderson, who originally was Emmanuel's high school pastor, took over in 2006. This church continues to grow today. 2013 became a multi-site church. So Dany, welcome to the show.
It's an honor. Thanks for having me, Rich.
I'm so glad you're here today. Why don't you give us a sense of Emmanuel Church? Kind of give us, if people were to arrive this weekend, what would they experience? And kind of give us your connection, your story with this church.
Yeah, so I feel like if people walked into our church this weekend, what they would experience is a welcoming environment. It's very warm. It's a place that makes sense to people. And we hear that a lot. And our message is about life and how the Bible intersects with our lives. And the music is contemporary, so it's relevant to what's going on in our world today musically. And it's just it makes sense to people. And the message is transformative. And so we're always trying to help people move from where they are to where God wants them to be. So
very cool. Well, one of the things that caught my attention was at the age of 28, you ended up taking over from the founding pastor who had founded the church 29 years before. So the church was actually older than you, and he had been there, longer than you'd been alive. Man, I want to hear that story. Kind of give me your connection. How did you get connected originally as a youth pastor? And let's try to talk through that transition.
Well, my story goes back to a woman. I met my wife at Liberty University, and I was at that time I was studying to be a communication. I was a communications major. It wasn't even in seminary at Liberty. When we got married at Emmanuel because she grew up at the church in the Center Grove, Greenwood area, and kind of met the pastor at that time. And 6 months later, they were looking for a youth pastor, and they actually went back to Liberty to kind of finish up a class. And they called and they said, "Hey, would you come back for an interview for the youth pastor position?" And so I said, "Goodness, I'm 22 years old. Why not give it a shot?"
Right.
And I had done some youth ministry stuff on the weekends at Liberty, some discipleship now stuff, and I really loved it. And so I gave it a shot, and one thing led to another, and I really enjoyed it. And God used the ministry there to reach a lot of teenagers for Christ. So that's kind of how things started as a youth pastor there.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, at what point did the kind of conversation begin to shift as your senior pastor started to think about his transition, and what did that look like?
Well, it was kind of abrupt. Honestly, I was sitting in my office one day, and he walked in, and he's a great guy. God did wonderful things through him over 29 years, and the church was running like over 2,000 people at that time. And but you could tell that he was starting to have feelings of at least those close to him, he was starting to have feelings of wanting to move on and retire. And so one day he walked into my office and just kind of shocked me without any prep. He said, I want you to pray about this. I think, I want you to replace me.
Wow.
And we're going to do like a 2-year kind of an overlap transition period, and just kind of boom, drop that
sprung
ball.
it on you.
So that kind of started the process, and from there.
Wow. So now what did the transition phase look like? How did you did you follow some steps? What were the ups and downs of that process?
We wanted to, and we intended to, and we kind of had a plan that was put together, and it was supposed to be this nice, smooth thing that happened. But I don't know if this is normal in churches. It doesn't always kind of work out that way.
Right.
And so our plan kind of fell apart, and things ended up getting a lot more condensed. And so I ended up taking over as the senior pastor more quickly than the plan was designed. And so it got a little messy, and there was a struggle there.
Okay.
Church transitions can be a little bit ugly.
Yeah, well, let's unpack that a little bit if you don't mind. I'd love to hear a little more about that so we can, try to help some other folks who are going through this. Is obviously a huge issue for, for churches. What were some of those things that you feel like, hey, this was a good step? It was kind of heading in the right direction, and then, or were there some potholes that you're like, okay, if I want to talk to other church leaders who are going through this, here's some potholes to avoid?
Well, as a young guy, at that time I was 27 years old, and I had, I guess, a lot of it I would put on myself. If I were to go back and do it again, I would have honored him a ton more. The founding guy, people loved him, they adored him. He's the guy that fought the battles. He's the one who's bled for all these years and won these victories and led the church to do great things. And I wasn't as honoring to him as I should have been. And so there were some things that I had said that hurt, hurt feelings, and things happen like that. And so that kind of caused him to kind of drift away a little bit and kind of unplug and not really support me. But the thing was already going. So, we had to keep things, looking good on the outside, but behind the scenes, there was this tension. So on my side of things, I would have been a lot more honoring to him. And, but it was a difficult. We didn't really have a mapped out plan like we should have. We should have had steps. And I've done a little research on this. Most senior pastors who are transitioning, they don't have a plan.
Right.
And that's a big part of the problem. What are those steps that we need to take? And so I would encourage pastors who are thinking about transitioning, or younger pastors who are about to transition, to really work on a step-by-step plan, because it is absolutely essential to have that, or else things can really get ugly.
Right. Now, did you bring any kind of outside help with this process, or did you, kind of just, dream it up by yourself, or what did that look like?
At that time we did not.
Okay.
It was kind of created by the founding pastor, and he had an idea of wanting to kind of be, to stay on staff. And this was really the point of tension. He wanted to kind of stay close and maybe have an office in the building. And I knew enough about leadership at that point that that's just not going to work, especially as the founding pastor. People would never fully be able to look to me as the new senior pastor. And so that was really the rub there. And our elders kind of sided with me on that. And then it just, he felt pushed out. And he wasn't, but that's the feeling that he got. And so what ended up happening was he ended up taking a church 13 miles up the road.
Okay.
And that made things very interesting for Emmanuel moving forward. So that caused all kinds of struggles. But in the long run, it ended up being a good thing, because we had a different vision. So the people that didn't want to be part of a new vision had a place to go. At the time, it hurt like heck.
Right.
Because you're losing. We went from about 2,000 to 900.
Wow.
Because a lot of those folks followed him to the new church, and some didn't, but they were confused about the whole situation and who to believe and who to trust, and did I do him wrong or what? And so it just got real messy. So
now, it kind of take me inside at that point. So your kind of attendance is in a bit of a free fall. People are shifting. There was obviously been a change in plan. It went from like, hey, I'm going to retire, to like, well, actually, no, I'm going to go to this church, 13 miles down the road. What was going on, on your interior at that point, and what did you learn? How did you kind of, process through that experience?
Yeah, inside, I thought I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm
Right.
failing. Maybe this is not for me. Maybe I'm not called. Every Sunday I'm watching attendance go down. I mean, literally every Sunday I'm looking behind me and there's less and less people.
Right.
And I'm thinking, am I destroying this church? And I was thinking that from time to time. So, it really was, I've never had a major failure in my life like that. Like I felt that like this, I'm totally blowing this. Wow. So I had to, I leaned heavily into our elders, and if I would encourage any pastor who's going through a transition or taking over for a senior pastor to get the buy-in of their elders, because without their strength and support, you're just not going to make it. You're going to quit. You're going to give up. And so they were very affirming to me, very supportive. They said, "Hey, we believe in this new vision. Stay the course." And so I did a lot of that, but also in my personal life, my prayer life deepened. I really had to ask myself the question, do I want to make disciples? Because this is really difficult. And if I don't really want to make disciples, I'm going to quit because there's nothing good about this right now. And it was like that for about a year and a half. Wow. It was a long time. So, so I just really, it was a good thing for me because it made me look into my heart and ask the really hard questions of, do I really want to be a pastor and make disciples? And the answer was yes. So that made me stick it out. It's like, I really want to do this. And regardless of what happens, if the church grows or if we reach thousands of people and blah, blah, because I had all these dreams. When you're young, you're 26 years old, you're thinking, I'm going to take over and the church is going to go from 2,000 to 3,000 in a year. And it just did. None of it happened.
Right, exactly.
So,
wow, that's amazing. So now I think a lot of times we think about casting vision or kind of articulating a preferred future. We do that when we talk about, we kind of cast a vision and the assumption is like, oh, things are going to go great. I'm going to cast this vision. People are going to rally. And what were some of the, differences in vision that you were trying to cast? And what was happening in the midst of that? You're kind of, in a bit of a free fall, you're casting a vision, looking to the future. How were you able to kind of stay on that path, even in the midst of, some tough times?
Sure. So the differences in the vision, your first question there was, we were a very traditional inner focused church. I mean, it was a good church for a Christian. They got good biblical teaching. The music was geared towards Christians. And I was more of I learned from Bill Hybels, let's turn irreligious people into fully devoted followers of Christ. Let's reach people who are not Christians. So our vision was different. We were more focused on those who weren't there. So that was a
huge difference.
Turn off to a lot of people. Rich, sorry, what was your second question there?
The second question was, how did you kind of stay focused? Or maybe it's a little crisper question. How did you kind of cast that vision, even in the midst of, a bit of the shrinking and the refinement that was happening?
Yeah. So, I really am a big Andy Stanley fan, and he wrote a little book called Making Vision Stick, and he had 4 or 5 really good points. I don't know if you've seen that book. If you haven't, it's fantastic. And one of the first things he says in that book is to state it simply, state the vision simply, cast it convincingly. And so we did that. We came up with this vision. We exist to see people come to Christ and grow in Christ. And we would say it, and we would say it. And we would do series on it. And then we would tell stories about how it was happening. And that, Andy, in the book, he says you have to celebrate it, the vision. And the best way to do that is to tell people stories. This is a person who wasn't a Christ follower, then they became a Christ follower. Here's their name. Here's how it happened. And we just started doing that over and over. And before I knew it, people were getting it. They were starting to buy in. Even though all this other stuff was going on, it was like, wow, people's lives are being changed. And one thing I realized is that you cannot argue with life change.
Oh, so true.
I mean, when it's happening, you could say this about this person or this about, but people start to pay attention. They start to invite their friends. And so, I just kept beating that drum. And then we got kind of creative with it. Like one time, one of our staff members had this idea to pull out all of the pages out of a phone book. I mean, thousands and thousands.
Right.
We covered the entire floor of the auditorium. And we had people, step on them during the service. And we said, what are those pages representative of? And they're all the names of the people that lived in our area. And they are the people that we're trying to reach.
Wow.
And then another thing we did that was still with us today is we said, take 2 or 3 names of people that live in your neighborhood, your friends, your family, your coworkers, and let's write them somewhere in our auditorium. Literally in our auditoriums, we have 3 campuses. One is in a middle school, so we can't do it yet there because how evangelism. We challenge our people to write the names on the stage and on the walls of the auditorium so that every weekend they know who they were here to reach. And so it's a visible reminder. And so we just get creative and we cast that vision and we make sure it's simple. Andy talks about it has got to be memorable.
Very cool. Very cool. Now, obviously you're still there. So something happened, right? Things, I'm assuming at some point the leakage, shrinking stopped and then it turned around.
Yeah.
And tell us about that story. What did that look like?
Yeah. So around 2006, I took over. Things went downhill. Around 2008, we started to notice that people were bringing their friends, and it was because we were talking about everything I just mentioned. We were casting that vision. I personally embraced the vision. So I try to lead people to Christ in my personal life. That's so important for pastors to do. Man, if you're not a pastor doing personal evangelism, you can't expect your people to do it. So I would just throw that in there. But so I was leading people to Christ, and then I would tell their stories, and so momentum started to build. And at that point, we realized we needed to expand our auditorium. We needed to remodel. And so we engaged a builder. I don't know if people have heard of Aspen. I'm sure they had. They build church buildings. And the president, his name's Ed Baylor, he's a good friend of mine now. We brought him in, and he came in and he said, "You're still not ready to build. You have to get an understanding of the psyche of your people. There's momentum, but you still got to figure things out in their hearts, and so we hired a consultant organization called TAG, and they came in and they basically did a survey, church-wide survey of where are the hearts of our people, like what are they struggling with. And what happened was there was still a lot of pain left over from the transition. Right. And so we got this church-wide survey, we got all these answers back, and it gave us as leaders the opportunity to know how to lead our people.
Totally.
And so before we started saying, hey, give money to this, give money to that, let's build this, we want to jump to that as church leaders because that's
right, exactly.
But we understood the heart of our people, and the biggest thing we got from that survey was that our people felt like you're not communicating with us. You're not telling us what's going on. You're not, and they wanted to know more. So we just ramped that up.
Right.
We ramped the communication up and started telling them, you always think you're saying it enough.
Right.
Inside, but we never are.
No.
And so we just ramped it up even more. And so then we ended up doing a project after that with Aspen, and we remodeled our auditorium, replaced the pews with nice, stadium seating, and we redid our lobby and our children's wing.
Wow.
And that brought a surge of new people. The excitement, people were proud to bring their friends, and couple that with the vision. We saw a surge in attendance, so we probably went at that point from where we were back up to 2,000 and then beyond that. And then we saw a steady growth for, about, I would say, 2 more years of about, 500 people or so a year. And that led us into the next phase, which was the multi-site phase.
Wow.
Those discussions.
Yeah. So now at that point, so this is incredible. That's an incredible turnaround. And I think hopefully there may be leaders that are listening in today that are in that, that phase where things are maybe in decline. And I'm hoping, you've listened in on some of the things today. I love that you're talking about, clarity, and that you personally were living the vision. I think so many times, church leaders, we love to import our vision on other people, but it's not impacting us. It's not really integrated into our lives. So then, you kind of ended up in this new phase. You're looking multi-site. You're having to, I'm assuming, raise resources, in the midst of all that.
Yeah.
How did that happen? And I'd love to hear that story because, you went from, a little bit of a leader that people, were having trouble following, documented evidence. They're saying, hey, you're not communicating to us, to then having to raise money and send volunteers out to launch a new campus. What was that process like when you stepped out to raise some additional resources?
Well, we really are a learning church. Like we just take a learning posture. We're honest enough to say we don't know how to do things. And I never forget, I read a book called Humilitas by John Dixon. He said, what you don't know far outweighs what you do know. And I just love that quote. And so we hired a consultant again. We said, hey, we don't know how to raise money. So we found Generis, which is a great company. And I'm sure a lot of the guys have heard of that.
Yeah.
And they helped me understand and walk through the process of how to do a capital campaign and raise a couple of $1 million for a project. And so I got three things here that I would say to that is, number one, hire a consultant. If you don't know. And the big thing about that was it gave me courage.
Right.
I mean, it absolutely gave me this, okay, I can do this kind of, because it gives you the practical know-how.
Yep.
And then you have to execute the plan. And that's, it's one thing to get a plan, and then you got to do it.
Then somebody's actually got to do the work.
Yeah. So right. I remember our first capital campaign, there was probably a 3 or 4 week phase there where I was with a small group every night of the week.
Right.
Casting this vision to the small group leaders and the small group members, and then we did the series, and then we did the pledge card, and it was a ton of work, and so you got to be ready to execute on that. And then the third thing that I think this is so invaluable for me, the guy I was working with, his name's Brad Leeper. He said, you have to build personal relationships with your high capacity donors. In fact, you would have to disciple them. And it clicked. It clicked with me. Like these people, they need to become like Christ, just like everybody else.
Right.
And so I engaged in that. I threw myself into that. And I'll just tell you this really quick. And I don't say this to brag at all. This is to God's glory. But we're getting ready to build our third site, temporary site. Now it's meeting in a middle school, and it's going to be about $7 million or something like that. And so I'm engaging these relationships that I've built over 7 years.
Yep.
Already given gifts. And last week we received a gift, a commitment. It hasn't come yet, of $600,000 from one family.
Wow.
And we already got a gift from another family of $500,000.
Wow, so that's amazing.
From two of those families, we were, a seventh of the way there or more. And that's just the power of relationship.
Yes.
That would have never happened 8 years ago. I just didn't have those relationships.
Absolutely.
All of the trust that has been built over these years, it's so valuable.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
I just want to lean in on that, particularly that last part about developing relationships. There's a number of church leaders who would listen in and say, I don't even want to know who gives what to my church.
Yeah.
I don't want to have any, and they almost come at it from a, if we're honest, like almost like a spiritual, superiority point of view, like, oh, I don't need to know those things. What would you say to a church leader who says that? Because obviously if you're leaning in with, because I absolutely agree with what you're saying. If you're leaning in with kind of core donors, then you obviously have a sense of that data and, are using that data ultimately to drive a discipleship outcome. What would you say to a leader who says that today?
Sure. And I would say that's unfortunate if you're at that position, because making money, I learned this from Bill Hybels in an audio program CD he did one time. It is a gift. It is an absolute gift. Some people have the God-given ability to make money. And so Hybels said, you have to look at those folks in the same way you would look at a musician. If someone has amazing musical talent, you want to come alongside of them and say, hey, will you leverage that for the kingdom? And when he said that, I was like, that's it.
Right.
I am going to come alongside of these folks and disciple them, encourage them, cast vision to them so that they can help further the kingdom. And it absolutely works. And there's nothing unspiritual about it. In fact, I think it's a very spiritual process.
Very cool. Well, is there anything else you want to share before we pivot into the lightning round?
Well, I love to talk about preaching because it's one of the things I love to do. And, I think that our church is where it is today because we've hung in there and we've done some of these things with, internally. We've developed great teams. We've hired the right people. We didn't get a chance to talk too much about that. But if the communication from the platform is inspirational, if it's transformational, people will bring their friends. So I would just say a couple of things about communication. If you haven't read Andy Stanley's book, Communicating for a Change, absolutely must read it.
Great read, absolutely, 100%.
It's changed the whole way I communicate. But I believe with all my heart that it's got to be authentic. People today are looking for the pastor to be authentic. Is this guy real? If he's not real, they don't connect.
Right.
And so
there used to be a time when people wanted leaders. It was almost like we wanted leaders that were aloof or, disconnected. It was like there was something reassuring about that, but that's not the case anymore. What does authenticity look like for you? How does that work itself out? Because I think everybody agrees, but how does that work itself out in your teaching?
Sure. So I think that there's some you can step over the line on this and share too much from the platform, but there's a level that is. This takes discernment. You have to open up your life, and my best sermons are when I say, "Look, here's how this truth is working itself out in my life," or "Here's how I blew it when I was supposed to do this the way Jesus said to do it, and I totally messed it up." But so I'm working on this, and so if people can see that, oh yeah, he's talking with me here. He's not preaching down at me. He just shared a story about his life, how he's struggling too. I can listen to this guy, and they're engaged. And so I try to tell stories. I try to be very honest about where I'm struggling on an issue, and that's how I try to do it. And that's our culture now at the church.
Very cool. Anything else on the teaching front you'd love to share?
I really do feel like the teaching has to be transformative. And Dallas Willard is somebody that's shaping my understanding of Christianity over the last couple of years, and the heart is where I go for. I feel like the teaching's got to be at the heart level because we live from our heart, right? Proverbs 4:23, out of the heart flow the issues of life, right? So I feel like a message has to be geared towards changing the heart of a human being, and if we're doing that, we're going to see disciples get made, and so. I would just challenge, pastors and myself included to continue to go for the heart.
This is the unSeminary podcast. Stuff you wish they taught in seminary.
Well, we're going to jump into the lightning round. This is the part of the episode where we ask similar questions to everybody that's on the show. Today, I'm super honored to have Dany Anderson with us today from Emmanuel Church. It's a fantastic church based in Greenwood. And I'm just so glad you're here today. What's an online resource that you're using these days that's helping you in your ministry?
I'm a pen and paper guy, so I have to say there's not a whole lot. I need to evolve in that, but I do love my app, my app, podcast app, and my Audible app on my phone. I use them all the time. In fact, Rich, I listen to your podcast all the time. Appreciate it.
Now I got to send you $20. When you say that kind of stuff, that's a problem. What's a book you've read in the last, maybe 6 months that's shaping your ministry or thinking?
Okay, Essentialism. Great book.
Fantastic book.
Just love the idea that success can actually be the thing that derails you over the long haul. And I just love the whole book. And we've done a series on it at the church. It's fantastic.
Very cool. What's another ministry that you're looking to that inspires you?
We're definitely North Point fans. Yep. So we go to Drive, we do the small groups thing there. And so Andy is always inspiring us. But we also look at Craig Rochelle, love that guy, love what he's doing. And so we try to gain, listen to his leadership podcast and also Elevation,
Nice.
So.
Very cool. If you could get 15 minutes with any leader alive, who would that be and why?
Okay. I had to pick Craig Rochelle, and here's because I know there's other guys that picked him because God's using him to do great work. But I just would love to sit down with him and just say, hey, okay, explain multi-site to me, how you guys are doing it, how in the world is, what are the steps, and so that fascinates me. The way that God's using them to do multi-site today is it's just it's amazing to me.
Yeah, they're obviously hugely influential, doing all kinds of amazing things for sure. Well, I know being lead pastor at a church is a lot of work. When you just want to kick back, relax, have some fun, what is it that you do?
Definitely hang with my family, love that, and but I also love to play basketball. And I've got a 14-year-old son and a 12-year-old son, and they're getting that to the point now where the games are competitive.
They're throwing a little bit of elbow action there when they play now with Dad.
It brings me a lot of joy to play basketball.
Yeah, that's fun. My son's 13, and I would say in the last year and a half, he's taken to, it's fun to try to beat up Dad. It's that kind of, he's getting bigger and all that stuff. So that's really cool. Well, Dany, I really appreciate you being on the show today. If people want to get in touch with you or with the church, what's the best way they can do that?
My email is danderson@eclife.org. I also have a blog, danyanderson.net, and I'm on Twitter at Dany Anderson 23.
Nice. Thanks so much for being on the show today.
Rich, thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's unSeminary podcast. Don't be shy. We'd love to connect. Check out unSeminary Inbox. You can sign up at unseminary.com, and we'll send you helpful training resources every week. Plus, you'll gain immediate access to our exclusive members area with tons of resources you can use. Connect with Rich on Twitter at Rich Birch or through email, rich@unseminary.com. Don't forget to check out the show notes for this episode at unseminary.com. It includes links to what we talked about today and more. Leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Did you enjoy today's episode? Drop by iTunes and leave a review. Thanks again for tuning in to this week's unSeminary podcast. Join us next week when we'll learn more stuff we wish they taught in seminary.